which was very apparent in 2008, where through no fault of any of the majority of people, right, they lost their savings because banks were insolvent. There were bank runs, Um, so because
All right, welcome everyone, and welcome Aziz to our show. Let me tell you guys a little bit about Aziz. Aziz is an experienced native in Web3 and decentralized finance, aka DeFi. He is the co-founder of StellaSwap, one of the largest DEXs or decentralized exchanges on Polkadot, with a cumulative trade volume that exceeds $1.1 billion. He's a core contributor for Zine Phi, the first Sharia-compliant DeFi yield-generating protocol. He's formerly the Chief Product Officer at Fasset, a venture-backed centralized cryptocurrency exchange focused on the Middle East. Aziz has scaled startups throughout his professional capacity, and one of his earlier startups, Master the Crypto, was actually acquired. So given that was a very long intro, is to show you how much he has done in this space. So I'm very glad to have Aziz with us, and I would actually like him to tell us about himself.
Hey, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Aziz, and thanks for having me here, Shireen and Baran and the Takadao team. So yeah, beyond the points, the cogent points that Shireen brought up, I'm actually a graduate of Islamic finance in IU. So that was actually my first. That was what I was very interested in, right? To sort of like um as in going to the industry and basically change stuff, right? Islamic finance to me was the way. But obviously, once I learned the theoretical and the how it works, I felt that we needed a new way for us to sort of like reinvent or make things work, which is closer to the maqasid, right? And that's why I saw Web3 or DeFi and the blockchain to be one of those enablers, for basically the next evolution of Islamic finance. And yeah, I've been in the industry for quite a bit, and I'm very excited to sort of like take it to the next level, and expand the reach and use cases of this technology has to offer to the masses.
Thank you so much for that. So, Aziz, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, why did you decide to study Islamic finance? Number one. And number two, in our previous conversations, you mentioned that, when you started learning about it, you were actually a little bit disillusioned, because you saw that the reality was not matching with what you were studying.
Yeah, correct. Because when um I sort of like Islamic finance was not on as in was basically one of those things that I thought was my calling, because it was a very new thing back then, right? And I wanted to find a niche and specialize in it. And Islamic finance came up and sounds very interesting. Being a Muslim, I mean, that's something that, sort of like gave extra motivation. And then straight away went for my undergrad in Islamic finance for 4 years, right? I mean, theoretically, um, obviously, we learn the basics of how it should work, right? But then, when you look at how things are actually working in the Islamic finance industry, you see that there's a lot of concessions, and the spirit of what we study doesn't really match with the execution, right? For example, the concept of Islamic windows in conventional banks, wherein the assets backing the of Islamic finance, Islamic banking assets are really conventional assets, right? So understandable, because it's very hard for you to decouple from the traditional financial system. So once you get more aware, cognizant of how things are working, because that's how it should be, that's how it works. When we start something as grand as a scheme as Islamic finance, there has to be concessions, right? Given that, but I still felt that, there must be some things which are done, perhaps at the grassroots level and the technological level, to ensure that we address all this issue and basically address all the compromises that we once had for the growth of the industry, to make the industry stronger, and a viable alternative to TradFi, traditional finance, right? Which unfortunately you don't really see much of. And therefore, looking at new technologies is where I was very interested to see how you can really address the issues in Islamic finance and actually make it on par to the ideals, and the substance that we strive for.
Yeah, that's really cool. I always felt that today, Islamic finance, Islamic banks were really born as a marketing, out of a marketing need. It's like they were like, how the banks in these developed countries, they were like, how can we grow our market share, especially among, the Gulf countries, which were growing in wealth. So the traditional banks came and they're like, we should start this Islamic window. So then you have this, these non-Islamic banks, these traditional banks who deal with riba on a regular basis, pivot into Islamic banking. And I think this is where the disconnect happens. And personally, I'm like a little bit always uncomfortable with that. I'm like, how can you be both Islamic and non-Islamic? So I guess maybe I would like to hear your thoughts on, we as a population, Muslim population, we are, we're growing at double the rate of non-Muslims, right? So we are growing at a population growth rate of 1.5% a year and non-Muslims at 0.7%. So we are stronger and stronger in terms of consumer power. Why is the Islamic banking system in the traditional finance world still this way, where it's still, wishy-washy?
I think, there's obviously a lot of factors, right? A lot of underlying factors that prevents wide adoption or wide utility of Islamic finance, as well as, sorry to say, certain degree of product market fit. Because if you look at the factors of, how do we spur adoption for that? It's usually a government sort of like push, right? And if you talk about creating a great framework support system, for to foster this industry. But beyond that, right, I think it's important to know that the tenets of Islamic finance vis-a-vis conventional finance, right? The fact that we have to steer away from interest or riba means that we have to conceive a lot of ways, a lot of ways um, um, to to circumvent interest, right? And that entails creating new structures, creating more adding in more stakeholders, and adding in more intermediaries. So all in all, adding in like legal stuff, right? Much more legal work. So all in all, what that creates is cost burden, right, from a business point of view, and therefore just economically, Islamic finance is takes the back seat in terms of cost, because conventional finance is straight up interest. It's much more easier to operate, and unfortunately, that is one of the main weaknesses of Islamic finance, where it doesn't seem to be economically viable relative to conventional finance, and therefore you can imagine the motivations, the support, from a national level starts to dwindle down, and I think from a consumer perspective, that's where, because most of us aren't really, the majority of us aren't really aware of of the of the prohibitions, or basically deeper level stuff that entails Islamic finance, in general. And that's why the perceived elements when you look at banking and how I want to evaluate a car loan, how I want to evaluate a mortgage, has been watered down with sort of like these non understanding of is those important Islamic finance principles, and therefore, they don't really see the value, or they don't really understand the importance of Islamic finance products, since they're more expensive anyway, right? So I think that creates sort of like a vicious cycle where economically it doesn't make sense, and from a consumer point of view, there's a lot of education required, and the cost doesn't make sense to the masses, and they don't. There's no collective national efforts to spearhead those kind of adoption, and therefore you can see I mean, it naturally becomes secondary, and conventional banking is always, I mean, always trumps, right? And I think that's the reality of things as I see it.
Yeah, I also always felt that a lot of our population and the population growth among the Muslim community is among, countries where there is a very weak financial infrastructure to begin with. So they never really had banks to begin with, let alone Islamic finance. It ends up that Islamic finance is really only developed in worlds where there were already, in countries, sorry, where there were already very strong banking systems, and then they just lay it over this, this extra branding of Islamic finance. So a lot of the vast majority of Muslim populations, like you look at Indonesia, you look at Pakistan, they still remain unbanked. So I think as a result, this particular niche was unable to really grow beyond the rich Muslim population. So, and then you brought up something else which was really interesting, which is like it kind of is a branding problem. Like as Muslims, particularly in my generation, maybe in Murad and me were the same generation, we maybe don't really know the difference between what is halal or haram in finance. I wonder today, with the growth of blogs, YouTube, TikTok, a lot of information, do you think this is changing? Do you think Muslims are waking up to the difference between conventional and Islamic finance?
Yeah, I think you can, especially the younger generations, such as my generation. We are getting to be more cognizant. And interestingly, it's also partly because of the economic weaknesses that we see in our financial systems. When you talk about 2008, when you talk about inflation, when you talk about all those effects of riba or interest that has been widely explicated since for a long time, right? And you can see the effects of all this um, uh, of riba, right? The negative effects, and then you sort of the natural tendency for anyone would be, all right, okay, we know that there's a lot of weaknesses in the economic system, and therefore let's look at the solutions. And Islamic finance has been seen as one of those viable solutions for that, right? When you look at 2008, you can see that the resilience of Islamic banks, right, due to various limitations that Islamic banks had, made it more resilient than the conventional system, right? Stronger capital reserves, and those are sort of like one of those points where Islamic finance naturally stood out, right? As a way of governance, as a way um, of a really viable alternative to conventional system, which is which I mean has been around for the last 3 decades, right? So I think it's interesting to see, the relationship between what manifests as economic sort of like weaknesses that we see nowadays, and we look at the tenets of Islamic finance, the ideals of Islamic finance, and then we naturally look towards that as one of those solutions to that.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you just said. Yes, Sharon?
I actually have a question for Murad, because we talked about this as, like Aziz is saying, it's a better system, the Islamic finance system, and we'll explore a little bit why that is later on when we compare it to crypto and the blockchain. But there's a branding problem. Like people from our generation don't really know the difference between Islamic finance, conventional finance. So Murad, let me ask you, you've lived in, let's say, the Gulf countries for about 20 years now. Have you ever taken a bank loan?
No, I haven't taken a bank loan in the region.
Why?
But to be honest, I didn't have the need, first of all, I was auto-financing myself rather than getting a loan through a bank. And there were different, when I first moved to the Middle East, of course, I heard about all the Islamic banking and Islamic banks and everything. And they had so many ways for you to get an access to buying a house, buying a car, or whatever, through through Islamic lending and Islamic model of financing. Okay, but a few of my friends did do some of those lending and borrowing. Okay, They were in alliance in line with the Sharia tenets, with few small exceptions when, for example, you take ownership or you don't take ownership of certain asset, like a car, for example. And if you clarify this with some of the scholars, they were still in doubt: is it really Shari or not Shari? So they had a lot of back and forth discussion, even though among most of the scholars it was acceptable. Okay. So it was you and your feeling, deeply, if you like, very, very into your tenet and religious belief, we kind of try to shy away from any of this banking system, because at the end of the day, it's like the shaitan left by the door and came back by the window. And like you say, they're all interconnected, because you have what they call the interbank system and everything. They're lending at the end of the day to one another, regardless if they are Islamic or not Islamic. Same thing when it comes to insurance, the reinsurance, Witakaful, and so on and so forth. They're all interconnected. When they need the money, they go to highest level and still fall into the riba system. So yeah, so I didn't have to. But going back to what Aziz was saying, it's where is this coming from? Is like, why did we ended up in that level of not having or borrowing from traditional finance, which is borrowed by the West, is to go back to the colonial era, where the capital of finance became New York, London, Paris, and they dictate, through the whatever power, the way financial institution would function. At this point of time, with the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and that's people they seem to forget, but during the Ottoman, the Empire Ottoman, we had a financial system that was based on the Sharia concept. So, and as a beginning, Islam is purely the notion of al-mal, or money, is very ingrained into our religion on a daily basis. How you give zakat, how you give your inheritance model, how you give a loan, Qard al-Hasan, everything is written down, and everything is there for the best, not only of the Muslim, but of humanity. But I would say for the past 100 years, living on the, I would say, the ruling of the West. And by the way, it's still like we look at the 15 nations, I think 15 or 13 nations still in Africa are using what they call it the franc CFA, which is a money printed directly from the central bank of France, to manage the economy of 13 African nations. Like I said, they left from the door, they came back by the window, and they control the nation economically, at least. So hence, when I talk to and when I go to many conferences here in the Middle East, and I hear all these conferences focusing on Islamic finance and blah, 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 at the end of the day, the guys who come from the West, they come to sell us their product. They have no interest in catering to the Muslim Ummah, because at the end of the day, they're like, we don't even need to build product for you. You're actually parking your hard cash into our bank, Switzerland, Singapore, London. And they are benefiting from our Muslim community, who are putting their money into the safe haven and not even collecting interest. So what is the interest of them building product for you to make money? They're collecting your interest for free. So we are in a very big challenge now. But the thing is now, the youngest, like you know, the young population, they're not the billionaire, they're not the millionaire, and they're not storing their money in the banking system in Europe or UK, and they want real financial product that caters to them. So what you see is a change of population, more Muslim growing up, religiously inclined or not, they still want to eat halal. And when you mean by eating halal, you want to earn halal and consume halal. And that's what things push into this Islamic growing and interest. Regardless of the West liking it or not, they have a still strong value within our community that cannot be crossed. So let's say I just came back from Indonesia, and I see that there is no Islamic banking in Indonesia. In a country of 250 million people, the main banking system are ribawi system. Can you imagine that? For the past 50 years, the Dutch left, but they're still using Dutch bank or whatever system of riba. But the young generation who are 14, 15, 16, they want to identify, first of all, as Muslim. They don't want to be shy anymore and claim they are Muslim. Unlike us, where we have to apologize to pray Salat, we have to apologize to say we are Muslim. When you're at the army in Singapore, you have to apologize to say I'm Muslim. I cannot eat this and this. Now it's new that they're offering halal meals and stuff like that. So you see, the young people, they are not taking their religion lightly, and they are going back to the usul, to the usul. And that's the Prophet says that Islam will never vanish until the end of time, and it will be regenerated, reactivated every single generation. When you think Islam is gone, Islam is coming stronger and stronger every year, and it will come back until the end of time. So that's why you see the revival of the young population coming and embracing Islamic internet and wanting now to have Islamic product. Alhamdulillah, if they're not building it for us, which I doubt they will, so the DeFi is a solution, and I think that Brother Aziz can shed more on how we can now build our future and not rely on others to build it for us, inshallah.
Actually, this is a good segue. So my next question is really for Aziz. I know you believe that it is, Islamic finance is pretty much a little bit of a lost cause on traditional financial infrastructure. And you see the blockchain and crypto as the new infrastructure. Tell me why you believe this is the case. Why do you think we can build better Islamic finance on the blockchain?
So, I mean, to start off, right, the philosophy of DeFi or blockchain in general, I think it is a much more fair system, because when you look at basically the creation of Bitcoin, which basically spearheaded the evolution of this entire industry, right? Bitcoin, why was Bitcoin created? It was a consequence of the recession that we saw in 2008, where there was a lot of, I mean, when you look, a lot of moral hazards going on, bailouts, banks doing really shady stuff that resulted in people losing a lot of money in their homes, right? So Bitcoin was created as a way to circumvent the traditional financial system and basically to address the weaknesses of centralization, right? And as in that's basically it, right? Decentralization, empowerment, and by decentralization meaning that a financial system which is transparent, because everything is recorded in the public blockchain, which is basically like a public database that is distributed across the globe by which is hosted by anyone. Anyone could host the database, right? And it's censorship resistant, right? No one could. Truth is via consensus, right? And there was really, when you look at such a system, I mean, many people, Muslim, non-Muslims, were attracted to such a system because for the first time, there is a financial system that isn't controlled by a few, where everyone could participate and which is transparent in nature, right? And that was the ideals and philosophy of blockchain, and this industry that we see right now. And if you look at, and that's why I think it's very important for us to look at this new technology and look and study the merits and study their structures to see to look at what ideals they stand for, right, and how that could impact things. For one example is one great example that I love to share with regards to how decentralized finance work, right, is the concept of non-custodianship, whereby you are in total control of your funds, which is something quite unbelievable when you think about it, right? Before the advent of decentralized finance and the blockchain, everything that we are familiar with, due to its centralization, we could never have fathomed how things work, But with DeFi, you can see, with decentralization, with non-custodianship, you can actually see the weaknesses of a centralized custodianship system, which was very apparent in 2008, where through no fault of any of the majority of people, right, they lost their savings because banks were insolvent. There were bank runs, So because all of us are born with the idea that banks centrally manage everything in your best interest, and whatever that they issue in IUs, electronic cash, right? Is backed, right? So DeFi allows you to really mitigate away all that risk, to really to manage your money yourself, so you can store your money your own way, right? Full absolute ownership, not beneficial ownership. Beneficial ownership is in the traditional finance where you pass it on to an intermediary, a bank, and they manage it for you. They're your custodian, But with DeFi, you can control your own funds. You have total absolute ownership of your funds. You have total. That allows you to do whatever you want. And not allow any entities to compromise whatever positions that you're in. So just on a high level, right? I was very interested in that idea, right? Then it took me a while to look at, okay, you know what? The ideals that is in blockchain DeFi is actually universal. I mean, it's actually what the Fasset also tries, if you look at it in some ways, also tries to espouse, fairness, equality, transparency, and you see that in this new technology as compared to traditional finance, right? And what, how can I have the rights to say it? Or anyone has the rights to say that, because if you look at the history of money or financial systems, even now in this situation, you can see the financial predicaments of countries, which are failing due to inflation, hyperinflation, due to the wrong monetary decisions, or even the basis of economic thought, right? So that is where we start to see, okay, DeFi is something which actually, if you look at, in a lot of ways, is very similar to the Maqasid of the Sharia, right? And therefore, that's the start. And we all know that technology is agnostic, right? So from that position, we can see, okay, you know what? This is an upcoming new technology, which is a much more fairer approach to creating a traditional system. How can Islamic finance thrive, or how can we build the next evolution of Islamic finance in this new technology? So that was the thought process in that, because it's a universal, DeFi is a universal thing, right? And we all agree with the philosophy or the ideals of DeFi, and therefore, how can we create a system that addresses the logical inefficiencies in traditional Islamic finance? And you can see a lot, because if you look at DeFi, right, you can see, man, as in there's so much things that can be created, right? I mean, it's novel systems and mechanisms can be created in this new ecosystem that really addresses the weaknesses of the traditional finance. What do I mean? As I said, cost has always been a barrier with regards to Islamic finance compared to the conventional system, because naturally we have to have more, more resources, more infrastructure, more mechanisms, right, to make things halal in Islamic finance. This cost outlay from a business efficiency point of view could really be automated in DeFi. And right there, even if we don't talk about ideals, we just talk about cost efficiencies, right? That via smart contracts, you can automate a lot of the stuff in traditional Islamic finance that significantly reduces the cost overlay of Islamic finance. So point one, cost can be significantly reduced, even if we're not talking about ideals here, right? The second thing is the novelty in creating whatever that you want, right? So one example, one core topic in DeFi which isn't really possible in traditional finance is composability. So what is composability? It sounds very complex, but composability is the ability for any products in DeFi to be utilized in other venues or protocols to for more utility.
Like
right?
like a jigsaw puzzle, you can piece things
Yeah,
together.
yeah, exactly. Just like a Lego where you can pass it on another protocol and then you can sort of increase your yields, for example, right? Now, a good example, a good analogy of that is in the traditional sense is explain composability is imagine imagine using your Maybank or CIMB or any Islamic bank savings account using that as a collateral for a mortgage in another bank. You can't really do that, right? Those are two separate banks, savings as collateral is something, quite foreign, right? But in DeFi, you can do so much with that because, the advent of smart contracts allows you to create parameters to allow you to code all that stuff, and assets could be transferred, can be fungible across protocols in a way which is very standardized, and in a way which really supercharges the experience or the utility of those products and services. So suddenly you can see a lot of use cases.
So what is interesting to say is like the motivation now is double. You have the reduction of cost that will bring Muslim and non-Muslim to use DeFi product. So there is a benefit, double benefit for the Muslim population now finally to use sustainable, cheaper product because of the reduction of the cost and be part of a model that remove all the non-Sharia compliance product into Sharia compliance product. And everything is managed by smart contracts that are non-breakable, and the trust is the law. The trust is, the code is the law, the code is the police, the code is everything, and where you can define everything. Is that exactly what's happening now? And that's why you have a lot of people, not only Muslim, but non-Muslim, particularly getting into that space as well.
There is an elephant in the room, which is a lot of scholars today still consider crypto to be not Sharia compliant, haram, quote unquote. How do we communicate? How do we explain? How do we get them to see past, the early misunderstanding?
Yeah, actually, this is very interesting, and I want to have your feedback on that. Based at, first of all, when I reach out like a year ago to some of the talab al-ilm, a student of knowledge, and some of the scholar, so there were a few scholars really were outspoken about the crypto, in particularly not the blockchain, because they believe that the blockchain is a good technology to have, is like you say, is a decentralized way of checking and verifying things, a little bit like the way you memorize Quran and you kind of have a validator for every single mistake that you will make. So the blockchain actually has the same principle of verifying and making sure you're online. But when it comes to crypto, yeah, there were few issues that some of the scholars they were concerned with, which was most the speculative business around this, people trying to get rich quicker, gambling as well, betting on some other things. There were a lot of apps focusing on only those type of product, the uncertainty, the riba going on that, okay, and also following the rule of the nations. If the ruler of the nation will decide on to use a certain currency, you have to abide with the rule of what to use and not going through a different means like crypto. And there were all this fallacy talking about crypto is the money of the drug dealers. And when we realized that 99% of the transactions are still being done in US dollars versus crypto, and cash is not traceable, but crypto could eventually help the authorities crack down on those actions. Hence, the drug dealers are not too fan of the crypto. All these kind of things were kind of issue, but based on the last discussion I got for the past 6 months, there is more and more scholar locally accepting the fact that there's no issue with the crypto as a product, as an asset class, and they don't see any issue, but they're still cautious when it comes to innovation. They always want to make sure that these products are not going to be harming the greater population versus benefiting some of the few. in the space. So I want to hear also your side. What was the sentiment in your part of your region, meaning Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, in that regard?
Apologies for that. Yeah, thanks for the question. So, I mean, look, I would see myself relatively young, right? This is generation. We're very fiery and very confrontational, right? And therefore, if things don't align, view, we sort of like go against it, right? And case in point, the scholars, since a lot of scholars say crypto is haram, and once you start dissecting, going down the rabbit hole, there's always arguments against anything, right? But I think as we go, I mean, look things at a high level from a neutral point of view, I think a lot of things which has been explicated to be the points which that scholars disagree with sort of like crypto, right, can be easily addressed, right? But that's not the point. The point is, on a high level, I mean, it's to protect the community, right? So imagine if the scholars in Indonesia says crypto is halal, the first thing that any random person would do is just speculate, buy stuff without knowing what they're doing, just bet on stuff, and then they will lose money, and there's negative effects to the community. So I'm not saying that. I mean, I I I'm agreeable with a lot of the points to make crypto that scholar says that it's a haram, but I see the point in protecting the maslahah, the community, right? And therefore, I think now the approach to be taken by those in the industry like us is less of debate about, hey, you're wrong, I'm right, I'm not, you're wrong. It's more of, hey, okay, moving on from this point, right? How can we create something of value, right? Which we work together with the right stakeholders, with the scholars, right? To really do the grassroots efforts for them to break things down with them, and therefore they could see the value proposition, the technicalities of how things work, and to see, hey, you know what, this technology base is agnostic, just as the internet as a technology is agnostic. It's very, what's important is how can we work together to craft the framework for effective governance, for furthering the protection of the community, right? And that, I think that is the approach which is going to result in a win-win situation for all, because there's a deep and strong learning curve when you want to understand this DeFi blockchain stuff, right? And as the guardians of the community, the scholars have a great responsibility to really dive down. And as those in this field, I think it's very important for us to work together with them to sort of like address a lot of the concerns that they have, and therefore craft a systematic way for us to create user-facing products within mind of consumer protection, which is basically what the legal system is also trying to do with regards to crypto, right? So it's exactly the same objective that we're trying to do. So I think that is because I've been down that path of, hey, you know what, let's debate, we're ready to debate, right? But it's not really productive in a way, when you're proving that either party is right or wrong. But the most important thing is that, look, this is a technology stack which is we know is going to benefit a lot of people, right? How can we work together to push it to a point where we can create user-facing products with the confidence of the guardians, which is the scholars?
Yeah, fantastic. This is actually a good segue to what I wanted to ask you. You started out at Fasset, which is a centralized exchange. You went on to build StellaSwap, which is a decentralized exchange, and now you're, core contributor to Zine Phi, which is, a yield generation product that is Sharia compliant. Why is this the first thing you decided to work on, coming from an exchange background? I mean, in the Sharia compliance space.
Yeah, because when I jumped to a decentralized world, because I was very sick of the bureaucracy and the red tapes of centralized entities, right? And I'm like, look, there's so much going on in decentralized space and so much stuff that we can build. It's less of we're gonna evade the authorities and the legalities of stuff, but more of how can we create much more vibrant stuff. And that's the transition that happened with me and my team. We say, you know what, let's try to explore. And within these 3 years, we've learned more than what we could have in 10 years, in DeFi, because the environment is changing so fast, and there's lots of new things coming up. So I think and when we started the decentralized exchange, obviously, I had the conviction of knowing that, okay, what we're doing is fine, because there is inherent prohibitive elements like riba, interest that we're touching, right? And therefore we decided to work on a decentralized exchange. And then, obviously Islamic finance is very close to heart, and I was looking at the horizon and looking at, okay, what's changed in terms of Sharia developments in DeFi? And sadly, very little. And if you look at the landscape, to me, it's illogical that Sharia, as in those that wants to venture in Sharia DeFi, looks at this naturally as a I won't say a money making scheme, but you want to be first, you want to exploit, as in be the leader, and then the ideals is kind of the execution is wrong, because if you look at past projects, you look at what was the objective, right? Is to recreate something, recreating the wheel, recreating another blockchain, recreating another wallet, recreating stuff, which was totally irrelevant, because to me, I see it as tech is agnostic, just as internet was agnostic. You cannot say internet is haram, right? Whatever that you do on the internet can be haram, but internet in itself cannot be haram, just as blockchain itself is just a tech stack. And therefore, from that basis, from that understanding, whatever that we see in DeFi, there's a huge chunk of it which is okay, which doesn't have prohibitive elements, right? And therefore, the intention behind Zine, was to actually say, look, there's already a lot of things which are halal. We are just creating a front end to access those kind of things on the back end, right? And therefore, in a very simple way, where users don't have to understand how blockchain works, or understand how a node validating works, right? It's just simplicity. So that was the approach that we wanted to take, because, I think it was more because we needed to do this, because, we didn't feel that there was a right degree of understanding or technical expertise in the ecosystem to do something which should have been done before. And therefore, we sort of took the initiative to say, hey, you know what? Okay, let's just take it by the horns, and use a cumulative experience to sort of pave the way for Sharia DeFi ecosystem. And one of the most important things, as you said, right, was yield generations. And yield is universal. It's not only in DeFi. In traditional finance, you talk about interest rates. It's a competitive thing, right? In DeFi, the most important thing is, okay, how can we ensure that the yields that we generate are okay, right? And for us, we already know what are the things that make stuff haram, and we avoid that. And we know the intricacies of that. And therefore, the right way for us to approach was not to just launch stuff, right? The right approach, which is we have the convictions, we do all the grassroots analysis, and then we pass it on to our scholars. And the scholars that we used was Amani, which is one of the most popular Sharia advisors, right? And guided them through the entire sort of infrastructure and how we do stuff. And that framework is very important, because not only for us, but that would pave the way for the ecosystem to sort of okay, this is the framework of yield generation, which is going to power my protocol, my idea. And that's where we felt that we needed to do all this infrastructural framework for Sharia stuff and governance to kickstart off this industry.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. It's like Ethereum staking, right? In and of itself, it is not haram, but then you can also end up in the haram, accidentally, because you might be validating a contract that has a riba involved. So there's a lot of stuff which is halal and some stuff which is haram, and it's because of this little bit, you have to avoid the whole thing. So what you guys are doing is fantastic, because now you're just okay, let's clear out what is bad, and let's just allow people to do what is good and create that framework so that people don't fall into it, which is wonderful. The other point that you brought up, which I 100% agree with, is the DeFi space allows a lot more creativity, a lot more the ability to do stuff that the regulated space does not allow us to do. And it's not really about escaping regulations. It's simply that, like in our case, for example, we see that in order for us to be regulated, that would actually mean we will exclude most of the unbanked population, right? Because you have to go through the banks. That's what regulation means. It's like you have to go through the banks. So as a result, you actually end up not being able to serve the customer population that you want to serve, because the regulations restrict you from providing that inclusiveness, from going in those other directions which they are not covering. So I think this is a great testimony to builders who are now looking in the Islamic DeFi space and thinking, I want to build something, as this is the time to build it.
I just wanted to say something. So it's amazing, now you have a different way to generate passive income. And I guess this is universal and can bring anybody being part of this money making, I would say, generation. Because, when as a Muslim, it's so difficult to find way to actually put your money and make your money work for you. So we go to traditional business, real estate, rental, and all these kind of things, owning land, sheep, and everything. But we are very excluded to the financial, let alone the DeFi project. So now, my question to all of you guys here, and Aziz, is like, with all the bad news about crypto, all the bad news about FTX, and all this centralized exchange who took advantage of laymen and population, give me some good news as a Web3 Muslim founder building real product, and how can we make our people and of course the overall Web3 community at peace with some real use case. And to be honest, I've been attending a lot of these crypto hangout places, and I don't feel comfortable at all. I think I'm not completely stupid, and I don't get most of the project that they try to pitch to me on a daily basis. And when I talk about Takadao, they wow, and they realize, oh, this is the use case now, and they let me speak. Then they say, hey, the guy there with the beard, can you explain exactly what you do? Try to encourage the Web3 community at large. Please share me some of your hangout and what you think, and what's the future of that discussion, especially for us as Muslims, in the Web3 space.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us, for us to create stuff, due to the fact that I've said earlier that there can be, it's really up to our imagination with the current stuff that we have, standards, infrastructure environment, for us to create a whole host of new use cases that you don't really see, in traditional finance. So I'm really sort of like excited, to sort of like pave the way for a new way of doing stuff. Basically Islamic Finance 3.0, right? And I think going forward, as in, this is going to be a natural thing for us, because we know right now, as in, just as there is a halal standard in every country, right, in any industry, a halal, a Sharia compliant way, because there's always Muslims, as the target market. In DeFi, there also needs to be a built-in, a comprehensive infrastructure for Muslims to be very comfortable in doing what they want to do. You pointed out a good thing, like, hey, you know what, we see a lot of news of crypto exploits, hacks, those stuff, and how could we bring as in safe, a degree of safety to users who look at all those in a negative light. In fact, as in, that reinforces the need for DeFi, because if you look at all this hacks, exchange going down, it's because of centralization. If FTX was decentralized, it wouldn't happen. The fact that FTX was a centralized thing, and therefore, that really, I mean, it's a black hole, right? You wouldn't know what it did, right? So that's why we're fans of decentralized finance, where you can have total control and custody and ownership of your money, right? And what's in it for you, right? And that's what we sort of like conceptualize in Zane. Like, hey, you know what? Firstly, we've been through this rodeo of looking at, okay, us wanting to create a Sharia company or product and services, very focused on that, right? But for us, we feel that, if you want, if you want to go to a restaurant to eat, right, your most important thing would be the quality of the food. Like, this is my favorite restaurant because they serve great pastas, right? And having a halal certificate is a good thing, obviously, because as Muslims, you have to be cognizant of that. But the most important thing as well is the quality of the food. And that's what we want to have, right? Sharia certificate is something which should be there to provide assurance, but it cannot just be the pièce de résistance. Yeah, it must be your products and services to stand out. And that's what we want to focus on. How do we create competitive products and services to attract users? In DeFi is very easy because the amount of yields that you can generate off stable coins, for example, which, by the way, stable coins are not volatile coins. It's basically like USD, which are tokenized, right? And therefore, it's one-to-one back, right? And you don't have crypto volatility. You can earn stable coins much higher, in double digits in DeFi, as compared to your savings account that is earning 0.1% a year, right? So we know that you can get all those yields there, but how do we create a user journey that is very simple, that even our parents could do it in a few clicks? And that's basically what we're trying to do, is basically to radicalize the simplification of DeFi to such a way to new users that they don't really have to have a learning curve and loaded knowledge on stuff, but it's just simple interaction for them to access yields which they otherwise cannot get in traditional finance. And that's the starting point for us. So you can just follow us in our Twitter, Zine Phi, ZaynYN, Zane, like Zayn Malik, Zine Phi, which is short form for finance. So ZaynYN Fi, you just search on Twitter, follow us, follow our Telegram community, ask us any questions, look at our website to see what we've done and what is our approach towards stuff, and join our beta, right? So because we just want people to just try it out and to see and to, most importantly, to provide feedback, right? Because what we're doing is basically something which is quite different in DeFi, because I'm a DeFi user, and sometimes I'm also confused with a lot of the protocols that I'm using, because the learning curve is so much. So what we're trying to do is really to abstract a lot of stuff, right? So we're really going back to basics, to ground zero, to really simplify stuff. So we really hope that there is you provide any feedback to us, go on our beta and give us feedback so that we can radicalize this journey together.
Yeah, I think 100% agree with you. The point of building products is not to build Sharia compliant products, is to build great products that are Sharia compliant. And they're Sharia compliant because we as Muslims who are building them, we want to be able to use our own products. That's primarily the reason. But the value proposition is not that they're Sharia compliant, but that it is a better product than what we have out there. So with that, I am, I guess, done with my questions. Mora, do you have I'll leave you the last word.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Aziz, for sharing. It's enlightening. I think our audience will have the time to digest in a slow motion or slow speech exactly what you're saying and review it a few times before they get every single component of the amazing words and amazing things that you're talking about. And I'm really feeling like in those kind of Star Trek scene where I see the future and your vision already just by listening to what you have to propose. So looking forward to having this on air, and really appreciate you in signing this very exciting space, inshallah, and bitawfiq, inshallah. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you so much, Aziz. Thank you for helping us out with this podcast. Until next time, inshallah.